The drone footage exists. The radar data exists. The soil samples, the ground scans, the academic papers, all of it exists. And yet, in dozens of places across this planet, the same sentence appears in official correspondence, research permits, and government memos. Access denied. Not because no one thought to ask, because someone decided the answer was more dangerous than the question. Stand above the limestone ridge of Shanlurfa on any given morning and you will see it. A low hill, unremarkable from a distance, surrounded by protective roofing structures and tourist barriers. Göbekli Tepe, 12,000 years old, older than Stonehenge by 6 millennia, older than the wheel, older than writing. Excavated since the 1990s. Studied by dozens of institutions, and yet officially only 5 to 10% of the total complex has ever been touched. The rest sits exactly where it has always been, beneath compacted earth waiting. The Turkish excavation team says this is conservation, selective, targeted, responsible archaeology. In 2024, the head of excavations confirmed a team of 70 was actively working on site. That part is true, but ground-penetrating radar has already mapped what lies beneath. At minimum 20 additional stone enclosures, possibly more, arranged in patterns that the existing structures only hint at. Whatever is buried in those deeper layers has never been seen by a living person, and the official policy, stated clearly since 2020, is that it will not be fully excavated, ever. Now move 11 time zones east. The mound rises 76 meters above the Wei River plain near Xi'an. It looks like a hill. It is not a hill. Beneath it lies the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the man who unified China in 221 BC, who built the Great Wall, who buried 8,000 terracotta soldiers in the antechambers of his own death. The soldiers were found in 1974. The tomb itself has never been opened. Soil samples taken in 2020 confirmed what a historian named Sima Xian wrote 2,000 years ago. The burial chamber is saturated with mercury, rivers of it engineered to simulate the rivers of a conquered empire. If disturbed, the mercury volatilizes. The air becomes poison within minutes. That is a real reason, a documented, chemical, measurable reason. And yet, here is the first crack in the comfortable explanation. When archaeologists opened the outer pits in 1974, the painted lacquer on the terracotta warriors survived 2,200 years underground, then faded to gray within 40 minutes of contact with open air. Conservation technology has advanced since then. It has not solved that problem. 2 sites, 2 continents, 2 very different official explanations, and a single question that neither fully closes. If the tools exist to look, why doesn't anyone look? Somewhere between the technical answer and the political one, between the conservation policy and the military checkpoint, between the court injunction and the religious decree, that is where this story lives. Not in the ruins themselves, in the space between what is known and what is permitted to be confirmed. That space is larger than most people realize, and it is not empty. There is a version of archaeology that most people carry in their heads, the one from films and textbooks. Permits issued, tents erected, brushes moving across ancient stone. Patient, methodical, open. That version is real. It describes thousands of sites across the world, actively excavated, catalogued, published. Science working exactly as it should. But alongside that map, invisible in most atlases, there exists another one. It has no official title. It is assembled from denied permits, military perimeters, court injunctions, religious edicts, and the particular silence of institutions that have learned not to answer certain questions directly. Each entry has a name. Each has a documented reason, and each reason, examined closely, leaves a residue that the reason itself cannot fully dissolve. In Japan, the Imperial Household Agency administers 887 officially designated imperial burial mounds. The Kofun, the largest Daisen-ryo, covers more ground than the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Independent archaeologists have requested access for decades. The answer has been consistent. These are sacred Shinto spaces, resting places of deified ancestors, and their peace must not be disturbed. Japanese scholars do not dispute the spiritual dimension. What they note quietly is that the sacred designation also prevents any DNA analysis that might complicate the official genealogy of the imperial line. In Egypt, 3 kilometers southwest of the Giza Plateau, a shaft sinks 30 meters into natural limestone bedrock. Granite blocks, each weighing up to 8 tons, line its walls. The structure was photographed once by Italian archaeologist Alessandro Barsanti in the early 1900s, and then the Egyptian army arrived in 1964 and built a military installation directly on top of the site. No excavation permit has been issued since. No official explanation for the military presence has ever been published. The shaft, partially used as a local rubbish dump, sits beneath a garrison as it has for 60 years. In India, under the Padmanabha Swami temple in Thiruvananthapuram, 6 underground vaults were opened between 2011 and 2012 by order of the Supreme Court. Gold, diamonds, jeweled thrones, artifacts estimated at over $1 trillion. 5 vaults opened. 1, Vault B, did not. The religious trust submitted an affidavit to the court stating that opening the final chamber risked supernatural consequences. In the year 2012, in a Supreme Court filing, the court paused the process. Vault B remains sealed. In Tibet, a mountain called Kailash rises 6,638 meters above sea level. No expedition has ever legally reached the summit. 3 major religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, consider it the axis of the world and prohibit ascent. Chinese authorities enforce the ban. No complete geological survey of the peak exists. Some researchers have noted what they describe as unusually geometric symmetry in the mountain's form. The scientific community has not confirmed this. The point is that no one has been permitted to check. Each of these places has a file, a dossier of partial information, archived photographs, frustrated researchers, and institutional correspondence that ends without resolution. Taken separately, each seems like an isolated case. Conservation, politics, religion, safety. Taken together, they form a pattern, not of conspiracy, of something quieter and more persistent. The institutional preference for an unanswered question over an inconvenient answer. The atlas exists. It has 10 entries, and in every single one the reason given for the lock is technically defensible, and somehow still not quite enough. The official reasons are clean, almost too clean. Conservation, sacred ground, structural instability, technological readiness. Each one presented in isolation sounds like institutional responsibility. Each one examined against the actual record develops a seam, a place where the stated logic and the observed behavior stop matching. Take the conservation argument at Göbekli Tepe. Preservation of fragile structures from weather exposure is real science. Archaeologists use it routinely, but at Göbekli Tepe, excavated T-pillars are not simply sheltered and left exposed for study. Some have been reburied under concrete, deliberately backfilled after excavation, sealed from the air and from researchers simultaneously. The Turkish Ministry of Culture describes this as protective measure. Independent researchers describe it differently, as a method that makes the site simultaneously protected and inaccessible, with no projected date for reopening. The question no one has officially answered is simple. Protected until when? Move to Xi'an. The Mercury argument for Qin Shi Huang's tomb is the most technically coherent of all the reasons in this atlas. It is documented. The soil data is real. The risk of organic material degradation upon air contact is real. The terracotta warriors proved it in 1974. Their painted lacquer gone within the hour. But Chinese authorities made a secondary statement that received considerably less attention. That opening the tomb also required ensuring the historical narrative preserved inside aligned with current academic understanding of the Qin dynasty. That phrase, historical narrative, appears in research discussions surrounding the tomb with unusual frequency for what is ostensibly an engineering problem. If the only obstacle is mercury, you do not mention the narrative. In Japan, the fracture is structural rather than verbal. The Imperial Household Agency has, on select occasions, allowed limited inspections of certain kofun, specifically those where the imperial connection is considered genealogically uncontroversial. The kofun that remain fully sealed are precisely those whose attributed occupants sit closest to the foundational claims of the imperial lineage. The correlation is not acknowledged officially. It does not need to be. The access pattern speaks before any statement does. And then there is Zawiyet el-Aryan. There is no conservation argument here. There is no sacred lineage. There is no Mercury. There is a 30-meter shaft, granite blocks, an unfinished structure of extraordinary engineering effort, and a military base, built on top, in 1964, with no explanation filed in any public record that researchers have been able to locate. Alessandro Barsanti's photographs from the early 1900s show the shaft clearly. The site's existence is not disputed. The Egyptian government has never claimed the shaft does not exist. It has simply placed soldiers above it and declined to discuss the matter further. That specific combination, acknowledgement without access, presence without explanation, is its own kind of answer. This is where the first fracture fully opens. Not at a single site, across all of them simultaneously. The pattern is not that authorities are lying. The pattern is more uncomfortable than lying. The explanations are partially true. Mercury is real. Conservation is real. Sacred significance is real. And yet in each case, the stated reason accounts for perhaps 70% of the behavior. The remaining 30%, the concrete backfill with no reopening date, the narrative concerns in an engineering briefing, the selective access that maps precisely onto genealogical sensitivity, the military installation with no public justification. That 30% has no official home. It simply exists, quietly, consistently, across 10 sites, 10 countries, 10 different institutional languages. A pattern that uniform is not accidental. It is policy, even when no policy has been written down. When a single site goes dark, it is an anomaly. When 10 sites go dark, across different continents, different governments, different centuries, different religions, and the silence in each case follows the same structural logic, something else is happening. The researchers noticed first, not dramatically. The way professionals notice things they are not supposed to say aloud, in footnotes, in conference margins, in the particular careful language of grant applications that never quite ask the question they are circling. A seismologist who worked near the Giza Plateau in the 1990s submitted findings documenting subsurface anomalies beneath the Sphinx's left paw, cavities consistent with constructed chambers, not natural limestone erosion. The paper was published. The follow-up drilling permit was approved, then quietly revoked by the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities. No formal reason was recorded in the public file. The seismologist gave one interview about it, then stopped giving interviews. He is not alone in that trajectory. In Mexico, the National Institute of Anthropology and History, INAH, has navigated the Temple of Inscriptions at Palenque with the particular tension of an institution caught between two legitimate authorities. Below the known burial chamber of the Maya ruler Pakal lie additional architectural levels that geophysical surveys have identified but not entered. INA's internal communications, portions of which have been reported in academic press, describe the lower levels as both structurally compromised and politically sensitive. The latter because Maya descendant communities in the region do not recognize the state's right to excavate their ancestors without consent. 2 excavation proposals in the last 15 years were shelved, not rejected. Shelved, which means the question remains open, the pressure remains, and the site remains untouched while the argument continues above it. That argument matters beyond Palenque. It is being replicated across dozens of sites globally, wherever indigenous land rights intersect with archaeological access. Whose past is it? Who owns the evidence of a civilization? The question sounds philosophical until it is being argued in a Mexican federal court with a specific permit number and a specific chamber depth at stake. Meanwhile, on the Andaman Islands, the Indian government maintains a 3 nautical mile exclusion zone around North Sentinel Island, enforced by Coast Guard vessels, codified in law, absolute. The island's inhabitants have lived in complete isolation for an estimated 50,000 years. Their material culture, their language, their genetic profile represent an unbroken human thread stretching back to the earliest migrations out of Africa. In 2018, an American missionary named John Chow crossed the exclusion zone. He was killed on the beach. The Indian government retrieved neither his body nor his equipment and explicitly declined to pursue legal action against the islanders. The island remains off-limits, not as a ruin but as a living system that contact would irreversibly damage. The irony is precise. The most protected archaeological site on Earth is one that is still inhabited. And then the scale shifts again. In Thiruvananthapuram, after the Supreme Court ordered inventory of the Padmanabhaswamy temple vaults, state officials physically entered chambers that had not been opened in recorded history. They found gold coins so old their mint origin could not be immediately identified. They found gems without provenance. They found a golden throne estimated alone at several $100 million. This happened in 2011, in a democratic nation, under court order. And Vault B, the final chamber, the one with the oldest seal, was still not opened because senior officials involved in the process stated in sworn testimony that they were afraid. Not strategically afraid, not politically afraid. Afraid, that distinction is important. That, because when the people whose job it is to open the door are themselves unwilling to open it, the lock is no longer just institutional. It has moved somewhere deeper. There is a moment in every serious investigation when the evidence stops pointing at the stated problem and starts pointing at the people managing the stated problem. That moment has arrived. Consider what has been established across these sites. A conservation program with no projected completion date. A mercury hazard used to justify narrative concerns. Access patterns that correlate precisely with genealogical sensitivity. A military installation with no public justification. A Supreme Court process stopped by sworn testimony expressing supernatural fear. Each of these individually can be filed under institutional complexity. Together they constitute something more specific, a system in which the management of uncertainty has become more important than the resolution of it. The Saqqara underground complex demonstrates this with particular clarity. Ancient writers, Herodotus among them, described a subterranean labyrinth beneath Egypt larger than all the pyramids combined. For 2 centuries, Egyptologists categorized this as literary exaggeration. Then ground-penetrating surveys began returning anomalies in the limestone beneath the Saqqara Plateau. Corridor-shaped voids, chamber-consistent geometries, running in directions that match the ancient descriptions with uncomfortable accuracy. Sections of the tunnel network have been physically entered. They lead to chambers containing mummified Apis bulls, confirming the site's ritual significance and its scale. The deeper corridors remain blocked, officially due to structural instability and the risk of collapse. That risk is real, but the Egyptian authorities have simultaneously restricted independent survey access to zones where no physical entry was proposed. Radar from the surface, refused. Structural instability does not prevent a radar pass from a safe distance. Something else does. At Kailash, the geometry problem sits in a different register. The mountain's near-perfect symmetry across multiple axes, documented in satellite imagery, noted by geologists and by several researchers whose work sits at the uncomfortable boundary between science and speculation, has never been formally investigated because no expedition has ever been permitted above the pilgrimage routes. The Chinese government and 3 major religious traditions maintain the prohibition in a rare alignment of secular and sacred authority. The official reason is spiritual protection. The practical consequence is that the single most geometrically anomalous large landform on Earth has no complete geological survey on record. Whether the geometry is natural or not, and current scientific consensus holds that it is natural, the answer cannot be verified. The ban ensures the question remains permanently open. A permanently open question is extremely useful to certain kinds of authority. This is the uncomfortable core. Not that governments are hiding alien artifacts, not that the tombs contain evidence of gods, The actual finding is more mundane and more troubling. These prohibitions function as permanent deferrals. They do not say the answer is wrong. They prevent the answer from ever being tested. And an untested answer cannot overturn an existing framework, cannot destabilize a dynasty's legitimacy, cannot contradict a state's founding mythology, cannot force a religion to revise its cosmology, cannot require a nation to rewrite the timeline it has organized its identity around. The lock is not on the door of the tomb. The lock is on the moment of verification. One researcher who spent a decade attempting to gain independent access to sites across 3 of the countries represented in this atlas eventually published a paper whose conclusion was straightforward enough to quote directly, "The sites are not protected from excavation because excavation is dangerous. They are protected from excavation because excavation is final. Once the chamber opens, the question closes, and closed questions cannot be managed. Managed uncertainty is a form of power. These 10 sites are not its victims, they are its architecture. The sites are still there. That is the first thing to hold on to. Not ruins in the conventional sense, places where time has done its work and left only fragments. These are intact, sealed by design, not by decay. The granite blocks at Zawiyat El Aryan sit exactly where they were lowered 3,000 years ago, undisturbed beneath a garrison that has rotated soldiers through 4 Egyptian governments without once filing a public excavation report. The mercury beneath the Way River plain still traces the rivers of a unified empire, pooled in chambers that no living person has entered. The lower levels of Pakal's pyramid hold whatever they hold, in the particular darkness of spaces that human hands built and human decisions have since refused to reopen. They are not disappearing. They are waiting, and the waiting itself has become part of the record. There is a document trail to every prohibition on this list. Permit applications stamped and returned without explanation. Court filings citing supernatural risk in formal legal language. Academic papers published followed by institutional silence so complete it functions as a response. A seismologist's data sitting in a journal archive while the drilling permit it justified remains revoked with no stated reason. These documents do not prove what is buried. They prove something more verifiable, that specific people in specific institutional roles made specific decisions to keep specific places closed, and in most cases chose not to explain why. That paper trail is its own kind of artifact. In Japan, a retired archaeologist once described the Kofun situation to a foreign journalist with the brevity of someone who had long stopped expecting the answer to change. He said, "We know approximately what is inside. We know approximately whose remains they are. We know approximately what a DNA profile would confirm or complicate. And we have been told with great politeness that we will not be finding out." He did not sound angry. He sounded like a man describing a weather system, something real, something studied, something that does not particularly care whether you understand it. That tone is the most accurate one available for this subject. Mount Kailash will not be surveyed this year. Vault B will not be opened this decade. The Sphinx's subsurface anomalies will not be drilled. The deeper enclosures at Göbekli Tepe will not be excavated on any published timeline. North Sentinel Island will remain a 3 nautical mile exclusion zone around 50,000 years of uninterrupted human presence that the rest of the species is forbidden from documenting. Each of these is a permanent present tense, not a mystery pending resolution, a mystery under active administration. What these 10 places share is not what they contain. No one knows what they contain. That is the entire point. What they share is the structure of their prohibition, acknowledged, documented, maintained, and quietly insulated from the one process that would make them ordinary: verification. The moment when the question becomes an answer and stops being useful to the people managing it. Somewhere beneath the limestone plateau of Giza, the seismic anomalies are still there. Voids in the rock that ground-penetrating radar mapped in the 1990s, and that no follow-up instrument has been officially permitted to revisit. Whether they are natural cavities or constructed chambers or something that fits neither category cleanly, the data exists. The coordinates are known. The technology to investigate further has existed for 30 years. The permit has not been reissued. That is not a mystery. That is a decision. And decisions, unlike mysteries, have authors. The trace they leave is not dramatic. It is not a sealed door with an ominous inscription or a soldier standing at attention with instructions he cannot share. It is quieter than that. A form left incomplete. A file with no resolution date. A question that an institution has learned to carry without answering generation after generation because the answer was never the point. The point was always the carrying.